A black man, Dwight Jackson, uses his real name to submit his resume for a job at a hotel multiple times and is denied an interview. He then resubmits that exact same application, but using a different name, John Jabrowski, and he's given an interview. Is that race discrimination? I'm Karen Michael. You're listening to The Job Judge. Welcome to The Job Judge, the podcast for anyone who works. I'm Karen Michael, your host of The Job Judge, where together, one episode at a time, we navigate through all those legal landmines and workplace dysfunction. And together, we hopefully can create workplaces that work so that you and everyone you work with can have a safe, civil, and legally compliant workplace. Now, a couple ground rules. I am an employment lawyer of 3 decades, but I cannot give legal advice on this podcast. It is just guidance. And also, we do talk about sensitive subjects here at The Job Judge, so just a forewarning. So let's talk about this case. An African-American man named Dwight Jackson said that he applied for a job at a hotel in Detroit. Now, there's been some other reporting that he did have previous experience at a luxury hotel. Apparently where he applied for the job is a luxury hotel. And what he alleges in his lawsuit that he has filed against this hotel in the state of Michigan is this, that he's a 27-year-old African-American man, that he applied to this hotel on multiple occasions from January 2024 to April 2024 as Dwight Jackson on his resume. He says he was not contacted by the defendant, the hotel, to undergo an interview for the positions for which he applied. He then applied to the hotel twice for similar positions under a more readily apparent Caucasian name under the alias John Jabrowski, using the exact resume in which he was contacted by the hotel to undergo the interviewing process the same week. So the allegation is that I apply for the job as Dwight Jackson. I don't get the job. I apply for the job as John Jabrowski, which he claims is a more Caucasian sounding name, and he does get interviewed. He does not get the job. They established that the consideration of the candidates, he believes, was based on racial appearance of the applicant's name. Shortly after he underwent the interview process, when he applied as a white person, he says he was informed that he was no longer a viable candidate for the position. And he says, upon information and belief, his applications were disregarded by the hotel, he believes, due to discrimination based on his race. Now, I will say that the hotel has responded, and of course they have a right to a defense, but they did respond to CNN. And according to the CNN article, the hotel says that they did receive this lawsuit, but of the 4 roles for which he applied, 3 of them were filled by Black applicants. And both the positions that he applied for, that Mr. Jackson applied for, using the false name John Jabrowski, were filled by Black people, and they were filled according to this statement from the hotel, all prior to the filing of this lawsuit. So is there discrimination in this case? This case is going to go to litigation. So it's unknown what all happened. But the takeaway from this is that, is there discrimination and bias in the hiring processes at most organizations? Of course there is, because we all have bias. You have bias and I have bias about a whole lot of different things. I mean, my actual name is Karen. You know what it's like to be a Karen in today's society? The last thing I want to put on an application somewhere is my real name is Karen, because they're going to have an impression of me. Because we think things about people. And it's not just based on race, it's also gender, national origin. We have opinions about so many different things, religion. So what can we do to at least try to avoid this reality of bias? Well, the first thing we can do is be honest that we have bias. So whatever we can do in the interview process to remove that bias, that's an important first step. In a perfect scenario, our resumes and applications as we're put forth to managers are name blind. I'd even wish they would be address blind. I don't want the hiring manager to know where I live. They might decide not to interview me because they think my commute's going to be too far and I'm not going to want to come in, or I'm going to be late to work or something like that. If on-site attendance is an essential function of the job and you've relayed that information to the candidates, then they get to decide whether or not they want to either make the commute or move or whatever it is. So anything we can do to remove bias in the hiring process is very important, because we don't want that to impact the opportunity of a person to be a selected candidate. And even in our own human resources, where I do think we try so hard to make sure we take bias out of those decisions. Maybe we're thinking, I know this manager and there's no way he's going to work well with a woman, so I'm going to screen out all the women. It's for his own good and for the candidate's own good. See, it's those kinds of things that creep into our brain that cause the recurrence of discrimination in our hiring processes. So the best thing that we can do is, number one, try to take as much bias out of the process as possible. But the most important thing we need to make sure is that we can justify every step of the process why a candidate was included or excluded from the process. And that's what this hotel is going to have to do. This hotel is going to have to show why this man was excluded from the process in these jobs and included in the process in these other jobs. And the way they're going to show that is that he, on paper, was not the most qualified candidate or among the top candidates that were going to be interviewed. That's what they're going to have to show. So in our hiring processes, we have to have an organized hiring system. And talent management, talent acquisition, that is one of the hardest roles in human resources. And it's a role that managers are not trained to interview, to select, to understand how to do those things. So one thing we can do for managers is to train them on the interview process, how to conduct an interview, questions that we can and cannot ask in an interview. For example, do you know the one question that it's illegal just to ask the question? It is illegal just to ask somebody if they have any disabilities that will require a reasonable accommodation. It's illegal just to ask the question. The other ones, like, are you pregnant and how old are you? And those types of questions are wrong and inappropriate because they can lead to us making an illegal hiring decision. But on the disability related questions, it's illegal just to ask the question. Now, in fairness, there's two exceptions to that. One is if the disability is obvious, and the other is if the person tells you, I have a disability and I'm going to require a reasonable accommodation. Now, all this is pre-conditional offer. Pre-conditional offer, it's illegal to ask those questions. However, even if the disability is obvious or the person tells you he or she has a disability, I don't want you getting into these questions and asking more information, because you can't say, oh, you have PTSD. My brother has PTSD. What happened to you? Because this happened to my brother. See, we get into these personal questions that aren't job related. At this point in the process, to avoid our bias, to avoid the potential that every candidate is not given equal opportunity, we need to make sure that our processes are fair and objective. And I just don't think we make enough effort in the frenetic pace that we're trying to hire people of making sure that our processes are clean and understandable and defensible. And so along each step of the process, you might have to justify why somebody was included and why somebody was excluded. And a lot of that comes down to our documentation, making sure that we have clear understanding of the essential functions of the job, that those essential functions have been communicated, that if it's just an internal opportunity for people, we're not considering people from the external. If we're only considering internal people for 2 weeks, don't bring in somebody else from external during that time. Follow your processes. And all the time, one of the biggest complaints I hear is that there's favoritism in the process, that we're just hiring people that we know and not really going through an objective process. Our processes need to have credibility. Make sure that as we're hiring people, We have communicated the expectations for the job, the essential job functions. We have analyzed in a fair and unbiased way who is going to be taken to the next level, next step in the process. And we can justify that through documentation. And then at the next level, our managers are trained on how to conduct a fair and objective interview. You're not here to hire your best friend. You're here to hire somebody who is the most qualified candidate. And I don't ever want to see this person's overqualified. That is a trigger for age discrimination, first of all. And when you tell somebody this is the job and this is how much it pays, if that person's willing to take that at whatever skill level they are, then who are we to say they're, quote, overqualified? And then when that manager makes that hiring decision, that needs to be documented. And as we're interviewing candidates, those interviews, those conversations need to be documented. But the only thing that should be in the documentation is information that the manager and maybe human resources relied upon in making their decisions to move somebody to the next level. If somebody makes a stray remark in the interview process, like, oh, I just want you to know I'm pregnant, you really don't want to be getting into all of that. All you want to do is say to the person, why would you want me to know that information? Oh, well, I'm going to need time off, whatever it is. And then just say, we'll get with human resources later. But it's not for the manager to be the one delving into these things. And please don't write down in the notes, candidate says she's pregnant, because that's not relevant to your decision making. The only thing in your notes is what's relevant to your decision making. And as we're asking these legitimate, non-discriminatory questions that relate to the essential job functions and this person's qualifications, you can ask behavior-based questions. Tell me about a time you had multiple priorities and how did you figure out which came first? Tell me about a time that your manager gave you constructive criticism. How did you respond to that? Those are all perfectly legitimate questions that might not necessarily have to do with the exact skill set, but it has to do with behaviors that we're expecting to see in workplace. And that's okay too. But just make sure that they are legitimate, non-discriminatory questions and you know what you're looking for. You know what the answer you're looking for. And then as you make your final decisions, make sure that those are well documented. So is Dwight Jackson going to win his lawsuit? If it's true that these positions were filled by Black individuals, probably not, but it'll run through its litigation. What we need to know is that we need to make sure as employers that we are paying attention to our hiring processes and making sure they are fair and consistent and objective, and that we are able to justify at every step along the way why somebody got into the process and why somebody was excluded from the process as it relates to the next step. Now, every week, I answer a question from a listener. You can write to me at Karen@thejobjudge.net. That's Karen@thejobjudge.net. Or you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok, and I get lots of messages on those platforms, and I just might answer one of them here on the podcast. And this is a message from a follower on TikTok. Really, this was in response to a lot of the posts that I do about workplace bullying. And it is disheartening to me how many people are being bullied and humiliated in their jobs. And hopefully, as we continue this discussion about civility and call out these bullies, we can put a spotlight on this and focus on eradicating this horrific behavior that some people experience in their jobs. And this is what one of my followers wrote. Been yelled at, degraded in front of the customer, and so have everyone else who is still there and previous employees for me. An example of what I'm against every single day confronting me like this. Didn't I tell you you were packing up for getting the inventory ready for the new location? You put the effing SHIT in the effing box, put on the effing tape, and put the box on the effing pallet, and the whole thing screaming in front of customers. That was the beginning. What's the agency that I need to talk to about this bullying situation? I have to get this resolved. And I have some bad news for this listener, this follower. There is no law that protects you against workplace bullying. And that's just the reality. Now, there are laws that protect you if you are experiencing any form of harassment, but it has to be based on a protected characteristic, such as race, gender, national origin, color, religion, age 40 and over, disability, pregnancy, childbirth, or related conditions, genetic information, those types of things. There's no law that protects against general workplace bullying, and there's no state that has passed a general workplace bullying law that protects employees from workplace bullying. So there's no federal law and there's no state law. And really, there shouldn't need to be a law for you, the employer, to put out a policy, a civility policy that absolutely prohibits this type of behavior, because no one deserves to go to work and be treated like this person says he or she has been treated. That is completely unacceptable. There should be no cursing at somebody, no yelling at anybody. There's no excuse for that unless there's some emergency situation where the ceiling is falling and you're screaming at people to get away. There really is no need to be yelling at another employee. And there's absolutely no excuse for dismissing, demeaning, or humiliating a person. Now, the advice that I would give this employee, the guidance that I would give them, because of course I can't give legal advice, is that that person should report the behavior to human resources. Now, I know, well, we don't trust human resources, blah, blah. I understand that. But human resources is your best bet to do an investigation. And the other thing that's helpful is to have witnesses, because if there are other people that either observed or experienced the same thing, that helps to validate what is happening to you. Let's assume nothing happens, that the person continues with the behavior. You think HR is not doing anything. Then I think you should write to the CEO. Let's assume the CEO doesn't do anything. You can go to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and file a charge of discrimination if there's a chance you think that the behavior is because of one of the protected characteristics. At least that would get your organization to be forced to do an investigation and respond to the EEOC. Now, it really does need to be because you think it's because one of those protected characteristics. But unfortunately, because there is no law that protects against workplace bullying, including in your state, your best bet is to work it out internally in hopes that there is an investigation and that the organization does the right thing, which frankly is terminating this person who is engaging in this abuse. Now, every week we drop an episode of The Job Judge. So be sure to follow, like, comment, subscribe here on our channel and also on our YouTube channel, and also follow me on TikTok and on Instagram at The Job Judge, where we put out lots of new content every single week. I'm Karen Michael, and you've been listening to The Job Judge.